Thank you to the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah, and particularly to Dean Elizabeth Cronk Warner for inviting us to engage in a conversation about clinical and externship logistics. My name is Luz Herrera. I'm a professor and associate dean for experiential education at Texas A&M University School of Law. And I am fortunate to have the opportunity to discuss clinical and externship logistics with my colleagues who are also professors and associate deans. Carrie Hempel at the University of California, Irvine School of Law, Catherine Burnett at the South Texas College of Law in Houston, and then Alicia Alvarez at John Marshall Law School at the University of Illinois in Chicago. So thank you for joining us today. I'll say that when the four of us met to discuss what we could add to the discussion, because there had been so many good programs available to talk about how we handle the COVID situation in clinics and externships and experiential generally, it became apparent to us that we were each steeped in conversations and decisions that entailed all these logistics, everything from how to handle our classes to in clinics, how do we manage client interactions? And so we know that many of you are also involved in these conversations, and we imagine that so many of you will have even better solutions that we might have come up with to some of the queries that we've presented each other with. So what we've decided to do is to make a few comments each about the issues that we're grappling with at our institutions. And some of us are still making decisions about how we're going to handle these things, and others have figured out ways to solve the puzzle that COVID-19 has presented us with. And once we have this conversation, after that, we are going to break out into groups so that we can provide all of you with an opportunity to discuss these issues. And after today's conversation, what we hope to do is, after gathering some information from you, is get this information and create some checklists that would create items that we collectively identify as necessary to address the clinic and externship logistics. So we acknowledge that the type of logistics that clinics and externship programs have to address largely depend on the institution's overall plan for going forward. There are some schools that are going fully online. There are others that are taking a hybrid approach. And then there's still others that are going forward with in-person instruction unless there is a health reason that would prevent somebody from moving forward. So for the last week, I'll start off the conversation to say that the last week I've been in conversation with our externship program director about what kind of agreements we need to have with field placement that we provide our students in order to provide our students with sufficient cover to discontinue the field placement if they or a family member becomes sick, or if their placement itself is not taking the precautions prescribed by state or local authorities. At Texas A&M University School of Law, pre-COVID-19, our policy was no remote placements. However, we found ourselves in the position where we are required to waive that part of our program and allow for remote placements. We've also had to think about new ways of counseling students that entails helping them understand that they are assuming some risk by going to a placement that we might not have, we don't have any control over. And also consulting with those field placement supervisors to discuss the law school's COVID-19 policy and request them to comply with local and state public health policies in order to protect our students. We also have to ensure that, in this new way of doing externships, and some of them, like I said, for us might still be in person, but there might be some that are remote. We also want to make sure that students have the right opportunity to build relationships, not just with their supervisor, but with other office personnel and some peers. And so that's part of what we're trying to figure out. How do we brainstorm with supervisors about how to provide these types of activities. And then also, how do we develop and communicate our policies for alternative arrangements if a student is not able to complete their hours at the placement? We've heard from some placements that it's not possible, right, for a student to do some of the work off-site because of confidentiality concerns or other restrictions. And so it's really taking an approach, a different approach to what we've done. So as we think about a logistic checklist for externship, some of the items that I'll be including, and we hope that some of you will add to this checklist, are things like checking with local state authorities and ABA regulations related to COVID, determining who signs off on any policy changes. For some of us, it's committees. For others, it might be a general counsel's office or a combination of that. There are some places like us that might have to review their policies and supplement them if they do not allow remote placements, and that is something that folks are going forward with. Obviously, the assuming the risk and the counseling of students and the conversations with field placement officers are also quite different. And so those are just some of the items that we've added to the checklist. And because we want to cover a lot of ground and give you an opportunity to give us some more ideas, I want to turn it over to Carrie and ask her to share with us what she's been thinking about in terms of the student experience. Because as we've divided up our task, Carrie will talk about student experiences, and Catherine will discuss concerns about how to handle client issues in clinics, and Alicia will help us think through some of the seminar courses and what faculty are thinking through in that situation. So Carrie?
Thank you, Luz, and it's so great to see everyone participating today. Welcome. I'm going to speak about just 3 of the concerns that we have been grappling with students in our planning for the semester. The first of them is concerns that we have about, as I'm sure everyone does, online participation in the clinic context. We have around 150 students in 13 in-house clinics this fall. And we worry, does every student have reliable internet access that will also allow them to preserve client confidentiality? And this would include when they're in class, because we often discuss clients' cases in our clinic seminars and practically every class we do. We also discuss confidential matters in virtual supervisor meetings with the teams. The students discuss confidential issues in student team meetings and in virtual meetings with clients, consultants, interpreters, and other people who are on the client's team. And so the solution that we've come up with so far, it's a solution in process, is that we actually are going to survey each of our students to determine which students truly do need access in our law school or on campus to appropriate space. And then we're going to attempt to designate space for each student, either in the clinic or in other spaces in the law school, just to ensure that everyone has the ability to preserve confidentiality and to have a quiet space where they can work for our clients. The second concern that we've identified is a concern about time flexibility for students to complete their clinic requirements. We recognize that, just like the rest of us, students may have other new challenges with our families, personal challenges, and other responsibilities that may make it more difficult for them to complete their clinic hours and attend class. So the solutions that we've come up with so far with respect to that is that we're changing our policy. In the past, we never recorded clinic seminars due to confidentiality concerns, unless some people made particular exceptions for students in extreme circumstances, but we've decided that we're going to record all of our synchronous class seminar sessions. And we are working with IT to put safeguards in place to make sure that we can do that in a way that helps preserve confidentiality. We're also have decided to reduce the number of hours that we ask our students to complete. We normally have hours that exceed the ABA minimum requirements, but we're actually reducing them just to the minimum to give students a little more leeway in terms of completing their requirements. And then finally, we are increasing the time that students can complete their clinic hours to a short time before we actually have to turn grades in. So after they've finished other exams, they still have the opportunity to finish their hours. And then finally, a concern about student awareness of the risk in participating in in-person activities, and also related to that, their comfort level in saying no and feeling confident that it will not affect their evaluation. In the spring semester, we made a clinic-wide decision to prohibit students from participating in in-person activities. And this was mainly due to the urgency of the rapidly increasing number of COVID cases in California and other issues. But our solution right now is to address through each clinic individually, working with the professors with their students. But we're not sure that this is the best practice. We may want a written acknowledgement from each student. The university may want a waiver from each student. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about how to best address this issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Kathy Burnett from South Texas College of Law, as Luz introduced me earlier. I'd like just to give you a little context for what we do in our clinics before I start listing out some of the client issues that we've been facing. The majority of our 22 clinics are direct representation clinics in traditional legal aid areas. We also have some smaller clinics that do direct representation in transactional and IP matters. And although we do some systemic research and advocacy work, the bulk of our activities center on individual client work. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, individual client work. We're still mainly working remotely. And some of the courts and administrative agencies in our jurisdiction have hearings on Zoom. Some are in person, much less than pre-COVID, of course, and resets are common. So in many of our cases, we're looking at resets that are 5 and 6 and 7 months out. Here are the challenges that we've experienced. And unlike Luz and Carrie, I don't know that we have as many good solutions already in place. And I'm really looking forward to what you have to contribute to this, please. One of our big challenges has been in reaching new clients. Traditionally, our students have participated each semester in outreach activities where they present to the community. Those opportunities aren't available now. They're on pause. So we've had to put much more reliance on social media. On Zoom, we've had town halls, we've done YouTube videos, but not everybody that we want to serve has access to that sort of communication. So we're going old school too. We're doing radio spots and flyers. And one thing we've been experimenting with now, given the appropriate waivers, going back to Carrie's presentation, are pop-up clinics, maybe pop-up clinics that we do in conjunction with primary delivery, like a food bank distribution center, and then a pop-up clinic related to eviction, say, for example. So we're trying to think of new ways, new methods of doing our outreach. Client interviews has been another huge issue. And this also involves timing considerations, but in a little different way than Carrie was mentioning. Here we find that our students and our clients, many of them are working multiple jobs. They have kids at home, that they're schooling at home, and that's going to increase in August as well. So our interviews tend to take place now at night. And late at night, like 8, 9 at night, after the kids have finished school, after the clients are in a space where they can actually concentrate. That's created different expectations than in terms of student availability and staff availability. And we're working on what that looks like. And of course, as you can imagine, that also then creates confidentiality concerns. Where do most of these conversations take place? Well, many of our students are sharing, they're back home with their mom and daddy, and they're sharing a bedroom with a sibling maybe. Our clients are having these conversations at the kitchen table. So confidentiality is a huge piece with our clients. Also, there's the challenge of rapport building and how does one create digital empathy. The third big challenge for us with client interviews has centered around signing documents. And here is an area where we're going to all have to check with our state and regulations, and if there have been any emergency orders or any provisions to arrange for example, in Texas now we're allowing for remote notaries. That's fantastic for a notarized document. It doesn't do anything for us for a will. And with COVID-19, estate planning has been a huge issue. So how do we get witnesses present? How do we get things signed when signing becomes the issue? And the last piece for clients is hearing preparation. We made a mistake early on in knowing how tech savvy our clients are. Many of our clients are younger than our attorneys actually, or the same age as our students, and they're all tech savvy. We equated that with being trial savvy, and that's not the same. So being tech savvy doesn't mean that our clients will necessarily present well on the Zoom hearing. So we're having to develop protocols for actually having someone designated on staff that will walk our clients through getting the application and sort of a test drive of what a Zoom hearing looks like as versus the more casual FaceTime conversations that they are used to. And lastly, what is the plan B when we have remote hearings? What happens when technology goes south, as sort of happened just before this panel began? So that's where we are right now, and I'm turning the mic over to Alicia.
Thank you, Catherine. And of course, my phone is ringing right now. And my neighbor's grass is being mowed, so I hope you can't hear any of this. I'm going to talk about the faculty, and I think to some extent there are mirror images to some of what Carrie has talked about and some of what Catherine has talked about. So I'm going to leave that aside and concentrate on what the seminar looks like, and to some extent some of the logistics for the faculty that teach the clinics. So I think as all of you are experiencing, we're experiencing challenges in engaging students online, and we're having to learn how to teach online as well. And I think a lot of the online courses that we're taking aren't geared to clinics. And so we have to think about how do we adjust what we're learning about teaching online to clinics. What are some of the things that we're doing? We're opening the virtual class a little bit earlier to allow for check-ins at the beginning of class. And then we have a more formal check-in. But just as if we might have informal conversations at the beginning of class when we come to class, we're opening the class earlier to allow for more of that. We're thinking about how to use videos in the class so that all the hours of the seminar aren't, us talking. So in that sense, we're adapting some of the technology that from folks who teach online. And we've asked our communications department to create a virtual background so that we can give it to all the students. Because one of the things that we're struggling with is student participation where students don't turn on their videos. And so in order to equalize everybody, we've asked communications to provide the virtual background to us that we can then provide to the students. I think that means that it likely means we'll use Zoom versus Blackboard Collaborate. And so, but I think each clinic will have to make its own decision. I think that in terms of supervision, we're thinking about, or we are having virtual office hours to account for the time that students would drop in our offices informally. And so we're setting up time in addition to supervision times to allow for students to drop by. And I think one of the things that that I think falls on faculty and that I'm taking on more because it doesn't make sense for each clinic to do it separately is thinking about what adjustments to the clinic manual do we need to make that cover things like access to the technology like Zoom and how to reserve a room in these special circumstances. So we normally would have those kinds of things in a manual, but we're having to make adjustments to them. And so I'm taking that on to provide that to all the clinics. So one, we have uniform way of doing things. And we don't have to think, not each faculty member has to think about what adjustments they're gonna make to client meetings, reserving a room, things like that. And I think we're in an unusual situation, I'm gonna say, because I think because we merged last year, and this summer was when we were gonna merge our technology. And so it's providing greater challenges for us, I think, and for me, I think, because we aren't fully integrated with the university, this is when it was going to happen. And so I'm having greater challenges in thinking about what additional technology and changes and procedures do we need to do our work, and maybe technology that was available before but now won't be available, and thinking about how do we in the university contracting system get access to some of the technology that's going to let us do our job. And that really is part of lawyering. So I want to make sure that that we give you sufficient time to think through some of these questions and some solutions in small group. So we're going to ask you to break up into smaller groups, and the Utah folks are going to break you up. And we're going to ask that you designate 4 people in your groups: a note taker, a facilitator, a reporter, and a timekeeper. And we want you to identify some problems and solutions, but we want you we're only going to give you 20 minutes. And so we want to make sure that you have sufficient time to come up with some of the solutions. And so we'd say identify 2 problems and then try to think the solutions. And we think that between the reporting back of the groups and our gathering our own notes together, we'll be able to provide some of these materials for everybody. And so why a note taker and a reporter? Because we're going to ask you to report back, and we're going to ask the note taker to provide the notes to Carrie, because then we're going to gather all those documents together and share them with everyone at the conference webpage, but also with the clinical folks. So I'd say if you could be back at 44 minutes past the hour. I know we're all in different time zones, so I'm trying to do it that way. And then we can do some reporting back and then bring you all back together. See you in a little bit.
On behalf of my colleagues, thanks again for being a vital part of this presentation. And thank you for the collaboration that will make all of us stronger and better able to meet our new realities. We appreciate your being here today. Bye.